My name is Dustin Wheeler. My family calls me Duck Duck, and my love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go. Hello, all my duck friends, my wine friends, all of the supporters and amazing people out there in the duck world. I want to thank you guys first and foremost for hanging out with us on another podcast episode as we head through this journey of Italy that we've been on. And we're going to continue down this road as we kind of head towards the foot of Italy. We're going to talk about a couple of regions when we get into central and southern Italy that still play some pretty fantastic roles in Italian wine, but maybe in a different, impactful way. We've had some great luscious stories of heritage and tradition and impactfulness and recognition out of Piedmont and Chianti and Tuscany and Alto Adige, and on we go. And as we head south, the history that is here is just as deep, but for maybe a lack of marketing or trend setting, this is something I'm still learning about, is not necessarily where we look to for the most recognizable Italian wines. As we mentioned in previous episodes, when you get into Italy and get into Italian wines, it is such a deep dive that it's near impossible to have tried these grapes and all these different varietals, let alone when you're abroad. To try to get all of these little nuanced grapes, you remember there's 590 classified varietals in Italy alone. And there's just no way to try all those, but there's also no way to ship all of those, especially when you talk about some of the little nuanced varietals you'll find here and there. It's just difficult. It's expensive. It takes time and a lot more land to produce enough yield to send those overseas than what Italy necessarily has to offer. But why do I bring this up? These regions here, for me and my research and my learning, are some of those regions as I've gone through and thought about the wine world where I go, where could be the next Napa? Where could be the next Argentina? Where is there land that we could grow great grapes on, but may not have the prestige yet of some of those big regions? So as consumers, this is a very important podcast because there's regions and grapes here that you need to put in your back pocket. So the next time you go shopping or look at a wine list or want to be a little bit adventurous, you look to these areas because the bang for your buck that you get out of these regions is just flat out incredible. There are wines here that are some of the most food-friendly wines in the world that pair just so fantastically. Some that understand their welcome and complement versus trying to overpower, which I think sometimes can be a good thing depending on the dishes, but in especially today's modern world is kind of like not the norm. Normally it's make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bolder. But these wines are so well balanced. So please get out your pens and papers, get your cell phones, open up that notepad app, whatever it is you need to do, Vivino, and make some note of these regions and some of these grapes we're going to talk about. And don't be fooled by it, by the lack of maybe prestige or popularity, because these regions also offer areas that are just steeped in history and stories. Just because they're not the Antinoris, the Sassicaiyas, the Barolos, doesn't mean that they don't have a story to be told and a story to be tasted as you get into these wines. There is history here that can't be touched in other regions in Italy, let alone the world. We'll talk about a grape here that has roots into winemaking that will go all the way back. As the first time appearing in writing, it's the first time we see it in writing so far, which typically means it's preceded way before then, but goes all the way back to 850 BC that we have a writing of one of these grapes in this region coming out of southern Italy. We're talking Phoenicians, we're talking Romans, we're talking Jesus time, we're talking antique, ancestral wines that you can still get today. It is hard, and it's not necessarily the easiest to prove, like, okay, what was Jesus drinking, or what were they drinking in the Bible? And a lot of the varietals that we think Romans might have been drinking, names have changed so much. It baffles me to think about. But if you go into England's history, England's history, and you think about the Vikings, and you think about when they raided, and how long ago that seems, right? If you do some research, and again, I love my history, obviously at this point, Roman Empire's gone. The Romans in England are gone. But the start of England and these Vikings, and in this time period, they are running into Roman remains and buildings, and they have no idea who it is. They're just finding these buildings. There's such a break in history between Romans and England being founded as a country and the Vikings coming, that Vikings and the English don't even know where these buildings came from. And to us, as we read books and, we talk about things like this in history, it's such a snap of the finger in how we see these generational gaps, and they seem so close together, but literally hundreds of years, where we're talking about two different distinct time periods that don't even recognize each other, but in our brain happen side by side. So it's really interesting to think about with some of these wines, and how do we know what Jesus may have drank, or what did they drink in the Bible? Hard to 100% say. We have some writings from Romans and Greeks, and we can say, okay, that we think is and what should translate to, but hard to 100% prove. But we can see with some of these grapes, we're getting as close as you can get to those ancient times right here, especially in southern Italy. So as we talk about central Italy, as we continue our trek down through Italy. Abruzzo is a mountainous coastal region right in central Italy. Uh, it is one of those regions where you get many vineyards planted on hillsides, and that's because the Apennine Mountains run through Abruzzo, all the way through where you go from mountains to hillsides, all the way until the Apennine Mountains run into the Adriatic Sea. This is a pretty prolific winemaking region. Counts for more than 5% of Italy's total production. Unfortunately, though, most of this is Vino Tavola, so your table wines, which means we may not see a whole lot of it here in America. Now, there's two grapes here that we'll run into and continue to run into through these regions. On the red side, you're going to have your Montepulciano, and on your white, Trebbiano. We'll work through some of these grapes, but you think with Montepulciano are your standard kind of go-to red wines. Great acidity, great ability to pair with especially traditional Italian dishes, red sauces, rich red fruit characteristics that stand out in these wines. Now, Trebbiano is a very light, lean grape, but depending on the producer, really can get pretty rich and complex. Next to Abruzzo, we have Lazio. Now, Lazio is home to Italy's capital. So, Rome is in this winemaking region. And Lazio spreads pretty far. It goes all the way on the west coast, goes all the way from Tuscany down all the way to Campania. So it really fills up that whole west coast side there. Now, white winemaking really dominates this area. Trebbiano and Malvasia are really the grapes that are going to dominate the area. But there's a grape here called Cesanese. Cesanese del Piglio. Let's try that again. Cesanese del Piglio. It's a dry red, great life to it, great acidity. It's a fantastic food pairing. It almost has this kind of spice to it. I have had a few, and I get like some pomegranate notes out of it as well. But really high quality wine gets made out of this grape. And again, when was the last time somebody was like, oh, I want a Cesanese? And until I had to look up a bottle because I found one where I work, and I was like, what the heck is this winery? Because that's just what it said on the bottle. It was Cesanese del Piglio. And I was like, oh, well, what the heck is this winery about? And I pulled it up. It was the grape. Okay. We're learning, people. We're learning every day, and we're learning together. So I'll own that. I had no idea what this was. I thought it was a winery. It's a grape, and it is fantastic. So you see this guy around, it's not going to break the bank. You know, that $15, $20 range retail, maybe even a little less than that. And just punches above its weight class. It makes fantastic pairings. And then you take it with you somewhere, or you order it on a business dinner, and people are going to be like, what is this? What is this wine master that we are graced with their presence tonight? Because this wine is fantastic. I am not going to steer you wrong. Please check it out. Marchese. This is a hilly, mountainous region that runs along the Adriatic coastline between Abruzzo and Umbria. Now, what's interesting with this region is it is a decent-sized region for Italy, and about 80% of this region is covered with vineyards. But We still don't see a lot of wines out of here because most of these, this area, this 80%, is actually not even DOC regulated or classified. So it is still going in that bulk table production, but has some great wine heritage to it. They're using Verdicchio here, Malvasia, Trebbiano again, but you'll start to see even Sangiovese, Montepulciano in this wine region as well. Molise is a small region just south of Abruzzo, and until 1960 was actually autonomous province of Abruzzo, but makes it now the official youngest region in Italy. What's interesting here is the winds that are coming off the Adriatic create a great warming effect, but they get cooled down at night because this is still sitting on, remember earlier we talked about Abruzzo and the Apennine Mountains, it's still sitting against the edges of those mountains, so the vineyards are planted on the hillside, so they get a cooling effect off of the Apennine Mountains. They are creating some exceptional wine examples in this little bitty region, but currently only produces about a 1% of Italy's total production. So unfortunately, still in that area where we may not be seeing some of the wines. But if you do get an opportunity to try some of these, please don't hesitate to jump on that. Umbria is almost exactly in the center of Italy. It is the only region south of Piedmont and Lombardy that is completely landlocked. It is surrounded by Tuscany, Marche, and Latium. Most of Umbria's production is vino, the Vino di Tavola, so your table wines again. Now, there is one exception. There is some very famous whites that come out of here, out of Orvieto. You may have, that name may ring a bell. Most of the whites that are coming out of this Orvieto are dry, light examples, but some of the areas can actually also produce some sweet whites that have been affected by botrytis. So that kind of really situates central Italy. As we've gone through, we're going to continue to head south, and we're going to hit kind of the boot, the right there at the foot, the arch, all of that in southern Italy. So we'll talk about Puglia first. It is unofficially known as the heel of the boot. It is the wine region that stretches across the east side of this southern Italian area. That kind of makes that heel. It's a long peninsula that stretches out in the Adriatic. And it borders a few different wine regions. But here you get some really hot conditions. There are long growing seasons. That's kind of the norm here. And it leads to high levels of ripeness and also typically very large yields. Puglia is often one of the top producing regions in Italy because of that. Now, it produces millions and millions of gallons of wine a year. But again, we're hitting the table wine kind of status again. You talk about these millions of gallons of wine coming out of this region, and basically 2% or less than 2% of the wines qualify as DOC status. And there are no DOCG status here in this region. Now, warm climate grapes just flourish here. Primitivo, or a clone of Zinfandel, is just the bee's knees in this region. Basilicata is predominantly a red wine region in the center of southern Italy. And when you get into this region, it is quite mountainous. It is where the Apennine mountain chain comes to an end. And they don't do a whole lot of wine production here, which is kind of often mistaken because of how many of the regions surrounding Basilicata are some of the top volume producing regions in Italy. The only DOC appellation in this region is called Aglianico del Vulture, and it is on the slopes of Mount Vulture, which is a dormant volcano. Now, Aglianico is a very ancient grape, and we're going to save that story here for a second. But here's going to be the trend for southern Italy. Central Italy, we're talking Montepulciano and Trebbianos. Now that we've hit the south, Aglianico is going to be your big player. Calabria, which is the southernmost tip of the mainland of Italy, and is kind of like the toe to the boot. This peninsula is home to red wines almost exclusively. Again, we're far south, okay? So red wines, the sun, the heat, all that fantastic for reds. Those crisp whites, you want to go central, northern Italy for those. Outside of talking about just kind of the slopes here, it's not a huge wine region as far as production, but has been known as a wine production region since the Greeks, not the Romans, the Greeks. So we're going even further back, right? So Campania, kind of like the crown jewel for southern Italy. It is the region's top tourist destination in Italy. You have the city of Naples, you have Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius, a lot of history here. Much of Campania's wine production still has this kind of traditional table wine approach, but there are definitely some very famous DOCs and grapes and history in the wine world coming out of here. Two of those are white wine productions. Fiano di Avellino, producing very aromatic whites. And this is coming out of an indigenous Italian grape called Fiano. And then Greco di Tufo, which is made from the Greco grape, which is thought to have been brought over from the Greeks. So we have an Italian indigenous grape and then a Greek grape, both white wines. But then you hit a region that could be placed up there in kind of Piedmont-esque regions as far as notoriety, and that's Taurasi. I mentioned a grape earlier, Aglianico. I mentioned a story earlier, going all the way back to 850 BC. That grape is Aglianico. Aglianico, very ancient grape. We know the Phoenicians were moving it around. Romans absolutely loved it. Goes way back in history. But unfortunately, it needs a lot of hot weather. And although it was very popular in being moved around by the Romans as history happened and the world changed, Aglianico starts to kind of get lost in the picture. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, it's so lost in the wine world. And you got to remember what we're talking about here. 1880, 1890, written language. Your farmers Your average wine Joe, just they're not writing down what variety this is. They just know it's been on their property and they've been growing it for a long time, and it's good, and that's all that matters. They're not into the collecting of all this data that we are nowadays. They take this grape and kind of forget about its heritage, and it really gets used as a blending grape here and there. So over time, it starts to get ripped out. During the mid 1900s, so 1950s and 60s, there's less than 2,000 acres of Aglianico in the world. It is on the verge of going extinct. So what happens? There is a very famous house winemaker that comes into the picture, Antonio Mastroberardino. And in 1968, makes history. Not just for southern Italy, but in the world. 1968, the Mastroberardino Taurasi Riserva is named best wine in the world. So this is almost like the wine world's like comeback story of the year. It goes from almost extinct because of phylloxera and things surrounding all of the adjustments being made because of that, to best wine in the world. Nowadays, it is talked about in a prestige level that sometimes, and take this with a grain of salt, is named the Nebbiolo of the South. They are not the same grape. They are not related. In fact, Aglianico is a very dark grape, whereas Nebbiolo is very light to medium bodied. You cannot see through Aglianico. You can see straight through Nebbiolo. But what they're talking about is the popularity, the prestige, the story, and just the connection that it's made with the people there. So Aglianico, very delicious, fun grape, great red notes, great spice, super well balanced. It's not like it's gonna make you feel full like a cab. I tell a lot of people this pairs well with steak. It pairs well with big foods, but it was also the gem of the Romans and the Greeks. And they didn't have AC. They didn't want to be weighed down by a bunch of heavy wine that's going to make them feel even hotter. They wanted to feel refreshed. And although this is big, still gives you that refreshing feeling. So go to Campania, go to Taurasi, find some Aglianico, do yourself a favor, and find your new favorite Big Red. Couple quick little stops to finish that off. Our tour through Italy, Sardinia, located in the Tyrrhenian Sea off the west coast of the mainland, just south of the French island of Corsica, is a large island region, obviously. Sardinia produces a small amount of wine compared to Sicily, but a large percentage of Sardinia is DOC status. So when you get to these grapes, you're going to see some Carignan and Cannonau or Grenache, as well as some Vermentino, Moscato, Malvasia. But they're very powerful, full-bodied whites, and some fantastic island wines. Sicily is the large island just off the tip of the boot there. The conditions here, hot and arid, and produces more than 10 million gallons of wine each year. It actually has more vineyard acreage than any other region. Lots of IGT, table wine production here. But it's because a lot of the producers here prefer not having to deal with all the DOC regulations. So you're kind of towing that border here. And the nice thing about this is, yeah, we're not seeing that influence that DOC may have in other regions and how controlling it can be. But because they are still high quality, high caliber wines, they are being exported, and they have enough yield to do so. So you will see a lot of Sicilian wines here in the States. Now, they have kind of created their own system of classification. Quality wines will have a letter Q printed somewhere on the label or the capsule, and that's kind of like a self imposed quality guarantee without having to go through like the DOC. Grapes that love heat love Sicily. Marsala is also coming out of here. So very famous on that side of it. Now, Marsala is not always what you think of with the cooking wine. There is high quality Marsalas out there. Please give them a try. And then some other grapes that you will run into, Nero d'Avola, Pignatello, Trebbiano, Inzolia, Grillo, Norello Cappuccio, Norello Mescales, Primitivo. You'll also start to see some non-traditional varietals like Sangiovese and Barbera as well. Don't forget, here is where Mount Etna is. So we talked about Taurasi and Campania and kind of skipped over it outside of mentioning Vesuvius. This is an area that was heavily dominated by volcanic activity, volcanic soils. When you get into those regions, they really produce some unique textures into the wine. It is a loose, sandy type of soil versus what we would think of with like clay or limestone. So it gives a different layer to these reds and kind of gives it a unique presentation of like spice or minerality to it. And not like spice, like spiciness, but just some of those earthier tones that you would think of with spices without getting into like baking spices that you might get from oak. Really creates some unique flavored wines, to me at least. So please go check them out. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. I couldn't do this without you guys. If you have enjoyed this podcast, if you've enjoyed any of the episodes, please consider helping us out and helping us grow. We're doing our best with sound production, but trying to get better with that, as a better software is definitely needed. You've probably noticed through some of the episodes and even in the same episode, some trends with volumes or background noises, and that's something that we're trying to improve upon. So if you do enjoy this, there's the support link that I'll post in the show notes, as well as you can go to our Buzzsprout site and you can donate there. You can reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, any of those social medias. If you so feel inclined to want to help us grow and support. And we are finally going to really nail down. I've already talked to work, talked to everybody around. We're going to nail down the exam. We're going to get that next level taken care of as far as the certified sommelier level. So any extra finances to help back that are greatly appreciated. I want to continue to do this with you guys for a long time. And in fact, we have some things coming on the horizon that are very exciting. And maybe you'll start to hear some voices other than just mine, and relatively soon. Who knows? Definitely be on the lookout. Maybe there'll be some announcements on social media as well. So keep your eyes on that. Appreciate each and every one of you as you continue to spread the word. Thank you for your support. I really couldn't do this without you guys. You mean a lot to me and my family. So thank you again and again and again. And thank you for telling all your friends and family and loved ones. And I hope you enjoyed our tour of Italy. If there is something you want me to go back on and really zoom in and give a more detailed explanation or presentation of, please let me know. As always, I hope you had fun. Maybe you learned something. But the most important thing is we got to drink some wine. Thank you and have a great night. Bye-bye.